All right. So welcome to our workshop on empathy. Um, we're your co-facilitators. My name is Aubrey. I'm the global head of diversity and inclusion at Atlassian, which is a software company. We tend to make software products for other software developers. But I am responsible for all of our programming around inspiring, recruiting, and retaining people from a wide variety of backgrounds.
Hi everyone, my name is Zeeshan Khan and I am the founder and CEO of EnabledTech. With EnabledTech, what we do is we help companies make products more accessible by helping them connect to testers for usability testing when it comes to accessibility. So a little bit more about myself. When the word empathy comes to mind, I think of back to 2012 when I just picked up the white cane at that time. I'm partially blind, so I had picked up the white cane, and I was like, this is going to be a new experience for me. And a year before that, I remember going to a conference. It was a blindness related conference, and being there and just I didn't have a cane at that time. A lot of people had their canes. A lot of people had their guide dogs. I didn't know what to make of it. I mean, I knew the word empathy itself, but I didn't know what it really meant. So until it came to like me actually using my cane, and I just want to share a few stories with you about that, like how that kind of changed or my experience of empathy and how my understanding of that completely transformed. So I remember one time, when I had started using the cane initially, some friends and I, we were just walking to we're walking, going on the way to our restaurant. And on the way, I see like 100 feet away, there's some guy, just kind of approaching us and stuff like that. And I guess he had the realization that I'm walking with a cane. So this guy literally jumps into the bushes and to get out of the way. I was like, that's an extreme level of empathy, I guess. So. But then there was like a few other experiences for me. Like I remember just walking, going home one time, and I was trying to catch the train. And whenever I entered the BART, I look on the left side because usually those seats, if they're empty or somebody gives it up or whatever, someone's nice enough to give it up. So I'm like, all right, cool. So I'm like, okay, I see a seat empty. Let me go sit there. I'm like going there, walking. I'm about to sit down, and somebody like pushes me, like, wait, I'm here. I'm like, oh shoot, I almost sat in somebody's lap because apparently the guy's pants and the seat color was like kind of the same, so that kind of blended in. And he was very gracious about it, and that was a very good example of empathy. He's like, hey, take my seat, no worries. I was like, okay, cool. And then finally, just one time I was walking back home, and usually when you are about to cross, there's like they're called accessible pedestrian signals. The button that you press and it starts making like a chirping or a cuckoo sound, right? The crosswalk. So I'm walking there and I'm like, okay, before I press that, I'm like, I have to find it first. So this is nighttime and I'm like moving my cane around and like I hit something. I'm like, okay, it looks like a pole. I'm like, I keep on hitting it, but it's like softer than a pole. It's not making a tongue ting sound, right? I'm like, I don't know what this is. So I keep on hitting it a few times. I'm like, all right, let me try to, see what's going on. I don't know. I'm feeling kind of lost here. So, and then I see the light turn, like starts doing like a chirping sound. And then the pole just moved. I was like, oh, shoot, I've been hitting a person this whole time. So I guess that was an example, or after that, I came up with the term called human Prius syndrome, which is basically when people become really silent when you see like a blind person approaching. and and this guy was just and then he moved and I was like, okay, that's not a good example of empathy. So yeah, so we're gonna definitely, as we go further, we're gonna be doing like an exercise, and Aubrey will tell you more about that.
Yeah. So one thing if you know me, my coworkers have this joke that they count how many times I say studies show throughout the day, and if I hit like 10, someone has to drink. But the idea is, so being an ally, I think the core component of that is empathy. And so what I'm going to talk about is actually the science of empathy. So it turns out there's actually a lot of really fascinating research about it. I think people tend to say, "Oh, I'm an empathetic person," or okay. Or I'm not an empathetic person. And it turns out that that's not actually true. So we all kind of have a natural baseline, but empathy is a changeable thing. It's a skill. It's like a muscle. If you don't work it out, you're not going to be very good at it. But if you work it out, it becomes a lot easier. And there's research that shows when you tell people that, they're more likely to try to be empathetic. It's really great, very helpful thing. But the other thing about it is we as humans are actually exceptionally bad at having empathy for groups. So you've heard the phrase, one death is a tragedy and a million is a statistic. And the reason for that is our brains are just not set up to be able to handle the amount of emotional difficulty that comes when we think about those large numbers. And so our brain kind of shuts it off. So that's a really interesting thing for me is how do we practice our empathy in one-on-one situations so that we're actually able to be emotionally equipped to deal with those larger empathetic situations, especially being an ally, for a large community like the disabled community. It's really important. And then the last thing is empathy is really uncomfortable. Right? By definition, being an ally, extending your empathy to another person means that you're taking on some of their struggle, some of their joy as well. But that's hard. And so we often shy away from situations in which our empathy is likely to be provoked because it's uncomfortable. So I'm like, fair warning, we're going to make you uncomfortable right now. But that's the goal. So Zeeshan and I have worked out an activity that we really love because I always say the more you get comfortable with being uncomfortable, the easier it is. Acknowledge that it's weird and then continue moving through it. Because I think often, especially in tech where we tend to have pretty homogenous workforces, right? We all know this, is we just don't get a lot of opportunities to exercise that empathy muscle for people who have experiences completely outside of what we do every day. So I identify as Latina, but I'm abled. So for me, thinking about being an ally to the disabled community is something I think about a lot, both personally and for my job. So that's the science. So here, it's changeable. You can practice. It's uncomfortable, and when you want to practice, think about one person, because thinking about huge groups just doesn't work. Our brains don't process that kind of information in the way that you want to. Now we can talk about the activity that we're going to do. So we'll pair you up with partners, do about a 5 to 10 minute activity, and we'll come back together and debrief. So we're really interested in having this be a discussion at the end. Want to hear your experiences. But I'll be handing out some cards. Oh yeah, we'll give them a demo. Sorry, forgot the demo. But so the idea is we're going to give you each a card, and it's going to tell you your situation. And we want you and your partner to role play how you would assist a visually impaired person in that moment. And the idea is sit in it. You'll take turns pretending to be that person who has a visual impairment. But the idea is talk about it. Figure out how each other approached it. What kinds of questions should you ask? What do you feel is an inappropriate way? Are you a human Prius? Right? I've totally been that person because I'm like, oh no, I don't know what to do. So I just don't do anything, which is almost always the wrong answer. But it's okay. Let's talk about that. So Zeeshan and I'll show you a little bit of how it'll go. He's not going to role play being visually impaired.
It's true.
But okay. So we'll talk about we're headed to the elevators, let's say,
Okay.
on his first day of work.
Okay, hi, excuse me. Could you guide me to the elevator, please? I'm kind of lost.
Oh, sure, yeah, here.
Okay, cool. Actually, would it be okay if I was to take your elbow instead?
Oh, yeah, that's fine.
Okay, cool. I'll take your left elbow.
Is this okay?
All right, cool. Awesome. Thank you so much.
So
So that right there, so as soon as I guess when I ask for help, I guess the immediate response is to like, hey, let me show you. So Aubrey, in that situation, what she did was, she tapped my shoulder and like, hey, let's go. Which doesn't work for a lot of people, or for, a lot of persons with disabilities, because they would rather the person that's kind of approaching them like, okay, how can I help you? Versus, oh, let me help you, just kind of grab my arm. That's happened to me a few times. People just come and grab my arm, like, oh, okay, thank you. But no. And then at the moment, like I think even for the person with the disability, just to be able to ask with just grace, and so that way the situation doesn't become like, oh, like make them feel like that they're doing something wrong. Make the non-disabled person, so kind of let them like, okay, sure. Would it be okay if I took your arm? If in this case, if you're visually impaired. So just kind of asking questions, just kind of communicating openly about it, even though it is uncomfortable. So.
Yeah, and I think something that also shows is that it's not just about having empathy as an ally, but also Zeeshan in that situation gently correcting my overzealous, right? Try to help. The opposite of the Prius. He said, "Oh no, 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 no," and gently corrected. So that's the other thing is empathy goes the other way, right? Have
Correct.
empathy. It's really hard to figure out how to be the best kind of ally for any particular person. And so by gently correcting as opposed to be like, "Oh no, don't touch me," right? Although you're perfectly in line to say that if you want to. But understand that assume good intent, have empathy for the fact that that person might be super uncomfortable and trying to figure out what the right thing to do is.
Right.
So, yeah. Does that make sense? Cool. We planned that ahead of time. We'll hand out your cards now.
So yeah, so we're gonna have a quick debrief. If anybody wants to share something, we'll get that process going. So
All right, everyone. So one, I love group discussions because I find as a facilitator, there's usually more wisdom that comes out of the audience than out of my mouth. Um, so actually, if anyone is interested in sharing their experience or has a question about what they did or didn't do, we'll open it up. Just anyone want to raise your hand? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah. 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 No, I love that point, and I think it's so important to talk about. I as an ally, I'm never going to completely understand
right.
that experience. So
Totally. Yeah, that's a very legit point. Thank you for sharing that.
and yeah, I always think that's like the interesting sort of ambiguity of this exercise is you're like, oh my God, I'm trying to put myself in someone's shoes. And depending on who you are and how your life has been, you may or may not have actually had a lot of experiences with someone who's visually impaired or has any other kind of disability. So it's like also that level of bewilderment. Yeah, that's awesome.
That's a very good point. About the fear of it, just acknowledging it and just kind of moving forward with it. So
And I think that was actually a really amazing example that you gave as you were role playing as the visually impaired person. That you can actually be an ally to the people that are trying to be an ally to you by being like, "Hey, it's okay for you to do this thing," right? Because the fear kind of can paralyze us. And so just saying, "Hey, actually, I find it helpful if you point out that I've made a mistake." That's also awesome, right? It's about talking and communicating to each other, and all of a sudden the empathy becomes a lot easier. Right here. Zeeshan and I actually
that's
did that right
yeah,
at the
that's a very
beginning of
good
the
point because like
presentation.
before this, I was like, all right, how many people are here and where are they sitting, right or left side? Because I don't want to be looking at a side. That's not no one there. So we made sure we talked about that. So.
That's a great example. The other side. Oh, absolutely. And in the same way that I demonstrated an overeager response to help, maybe saying, "Hey, the lights changed," or something like, "Oh, well, yeah, yeah, gentle." Mhm. Yeah. Right. And I always say, right, empathy is like, how would I feel if that happened to me? Like, I would never like being shoved.
Right. So like so I guess at this one time, like this one person, like we're about to cross the street, and this lady just like kind of linked arms with me. I was like, wait, who is this? Like, and she's like, all right, let's go. We're going. I'm like, where are we going? I was like, and then we're crossing the street. I was like, oh, okay, good. Whew.
Yeah, comment over here. Yeah, you. Sorry. Yeah. So I'm a big fan of what I call long-term thinking. So I do this all day at my job. Like I educate people about diversity, and they'll say things that are like really deeply offensive, but they don't mean them to be offensive, right? They're asking questions out of ignorance. And so I try to think, if I roll my eyes at that person right now, right? Because I want to do that sometimes, they'll turn off. But if I meet them with empathy, or I try to the best of my ability, say, oh, let me like answer your question, and then I followed up with, hey, actually, I want to let you know that, the language that you used there was pretty problematic. It's better to use X instead. People are really like, on the base level, most people are really good and want to do the right thing, but so many people don't even know what that is. My favorite example outside of the disability community is people go, oh, we don't want to lower the bar. It's like, get diversity. And like, calling someone like racist and sexist right then is like a really bad way to get them to want to listen to you, even though that's actually, right, an inherently very problematic statement. But you say, oh, actually, no, I'm talking about raising the bar. And now let me tell you about why you should think about a different question. But the other point that I kind of heard that I would really, really, is having empathy for yourself, right? We all have a well of emotion that we can spend every day. And so when you have one of those days where you're like, I just can't educate this person right now, having a little empathy for yourself, that it's okay to just step away and do a little self-care and just take care of yourself, I think is important to recognize, because I can also be nicer in some situations sometimes. I try really hard, but
And I think to that point, like just about empathy for yourself, it's just comes to the power of listening in silence, because sometimes it's easier to just kind of say something and just kind of see like, oh, it's I'm gonna respond right away, or this person is doing something to me in this situation. But at certain times, like if somebody's like, okay, let me help you, and I'm like really tired, and I'm like okay, I'm not gonna explain to them, like, okay, I'm like, okay, just kind of sure. They're like, okay, yeah, you go here straight. I'm like, okay, thank you, and that's all it takes. So
yeah, and I'm a big fan. So I'm someone who, like, I have really intense emotions. If you've met me, I'm like a Christmas tree all the time. Right? Really, really big and loud. I have the one breath thing. It's like, I call it my one breath check-in. But so if someone says something that like offends me, I breathe in slowly and breathe out before I respond. And when it turns out that if you breathe in through your nose, interesting physiological fact, if you breathe in through your nose, it can actually help stimulate your which can actually turn on your relaxation response. So you can actually physically manipulate yourself to calm down a little bit. But I find that taking that moment, because I'm also saying, I'm feeling angry, recognizing that it's okay that I'm feeling angry in this situation. Again, coming back to that self empathy. And recognizing it's okay, and then also kind of engaging like the front of your brain, right, the human part that says, but being angry at that person is not going to serve me in that moment, and it's not going to serve that person, and it's not going to serve the next disabled person that they come into contact with. For me, like, I'm much better if I'm like, oh, thinking about the welfare of other people. I'm like, oh, I can do this. It's great. So that's a tip that I would say is just take the one breath. Like, people are going to be like, why are you not talking? It's fine. You know, you'll come in, but like I said, it's okay. We all hit the end. We hit the wall on what we can do. But the other thing is, you're never obligated to educate someone else about your own experience or disability if you don't want to. Yeah, it's both like intent, but it also like uses. I'm a yoga teacher on the side, so really into this stuff. But yeah, you can actually. It's what your parasympathetic nervous system. You can actually kick it on. Um, if you Google Ujjayi breath, they'll teach you how to do it. It's really cool.
Wait,
I breathe
Ujjayi breath?
Ujjayi breath. Yeah.
I gotta look that up.
I do it like when I'm driving in traffic and really stressed, and people are like, "Why are you breathing like Darth Vader?" But it totally helps. It really does. Yeah. Oh, me? So I've always been a Christmas tree. I'm just like turned up to 15 all the time. Just my personality, really extroverted. But the self-empathy thing, it was actually, I was hospitalized. Just I had a medical issue in college. And it was basically because I started small and I didn't take care of myself, like a workaholic. And I ended up making myself really sick because I didn't deal with the tiny thing. And it was at that moment when like life slammed into me and said, stop. I was like, oh, wait, taking time for me, thinking about myself and my health. And then I started doing yoga, which it turns out is really, really good for empathy and mindfulness and stuff like that. So, yeah, right here. And I just want to follow up with something Zeeshan said about context. We talked about two things with the exercise and about the presentation. My brain immediately went to thinking about, well, the PowerPoint, do they need help with advancing the slides and things or even putting it together and things like that. And he asked, well, could we go early and you help me understand how the room is set up and whether there's a stage and the podium and making sure I know how to use their AV equipment and all that stuff, which I wasn't even thinking about. And so that importance of, I think, both taking more time, if you can't understand the person, the conversation is going to take longer. Is it because they need more prep, you know? And so I think we talked about that. And then I think to the point you made about context being so good that it's not just being able to give the presentation, it's understanding the room you're in that we all come from it. Yeah. Here, am I right? That's a great question. Oh, yeah. Okay, so the question was asking specifically about the company I work for at Atlassian, how we raise awareness about people with invisible disabilities. So the answer is one of the things that we invest a lot in. So we have a group called Side by Side, which is actually our all diversity employee resource group, and that's very intentional because we know that diversity people have intersectional identities. But one of the big things is we really, really encourage storytelling, which sounds really basic, but so we do something called side by side interviews. But it never focuses really on people's jobs. It's on them, and we either try to pick an aspect of their identity or a particular experience and time that was influenced by their identity. We basically just, I do it or someone else, we sit down, do like a 15-minute interview. We work out the questions ahead of time. So a really successful one, which is not a disability, was a woman coming back from mat leave, maternity leave. And she wrote this whole blog post about, or I wrote it, but she spoke it, about what it felt like, you know, the challenges she had, these amazing things. And all of a sudden, like, hundreds of people are commenting like, oh my God, I thought I was the only one feeling this. And so we do that the same with any type of diversity, including invisible disabilities, because what I found doing these repeatedly is that people actually start to recognize the shared humanity, right? They're like, oh, I don't have an invisible disability, but I've had this other struggle. And so that feeling that I had in that moment is similar to what you're describing here. So a lot of what we do is around that. Also, just ADA compliant stuff, we have accommodations for anyone that needs them, resources that people can reach out to. But I was just telling Zeeshan, I found professionally that building things at the programmatic level, so, like broad-based programs in companies to address things like invisible disabilities has actually been the hardest challenge for me. Not because of a lack of intention and excitement, but because I find there's so much diversity of experience within that finding the commonalities of what gaps you can address for people, as opposed to just addressing their individual situations, is a really hard challenge. And we're working on it. It's a big thing for our new fiscal year is kicking off in about 3 weeks. So we're like, yes, this is one of our pushes. So, but yeah, if anyone ever has any ideas, please email me. I'm the most Googleable person. Anything else? All right, cool. We're down to 1 minute, which is basically enough time for us to say thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Love this. Yeah.
This is really awesome.
And grab us, email us, LinkedIn,
Yeah,
us.
I'm gonna be here, so you can catch me somewhere. So